Hello there, this is Klaud. I'm Eric Elliott. I'm here with Jason Ray Keith. Now, if you're not into comics, you may not know this name, but he has worked on a variety of different comics, very particularly when it comes to colorizing them. You've worked on titles such as X-Men, Spider-Man, Hulk, Avengers, even for a Darth Vader annual. And I rummaged through my comic collection to try to find something that had your name in it. I got it. So you worked on X-Men 600, Uncanny X-Men 600, was released in 2016. And there's your name right in the credits. Now my question is, what part did you color? Because they don't really make that clear in this.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I colored comics. Here's how I introduce myself at Comic Cons, because I'm about to be at AwesomeCon this weekend in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm Jason Keith. I worked for Marvel Comics for 15 years as an exclusive color artist. I have almost 1,000 Marvel credits, and the one that you held up was one where I just colored the cover, and I think that's Mike McCone, just looking from here. Kind of that classic OG X-Men. Yeah. So that was a case of one of those covers I got to do. But as far as interiors, you can see behind me, I got a Red Hulk mystery box that I'll have at AwesomeCon. In 2008, I got to work on the very first Red Hulk, and that was the cover and the interiors for about the first 10 issues. I've done a lot of Wolverine Weapon X, Savage Wolverine with Frank Cho. Actually, I broke in at Marvel with Frank Cho on Shaun of the She-Devil in like 2005. And that's when I signed my first exclusive contract with Marvel. 15 years later and 1,000 Marvel credits, I've traveled the world doing Comic Cons as a guest. So you'll see me coming up in exactly 1 month at the Dia del Comic Festival in Lima, Peru, alongside Lou Ferrigno, the Green Hulk. Thank you for that intro.
You worked with Frank Cho, David Finch, Neil Adams, Ed McGuinness, Salvador LaRocca. You worked the gamut of pretty notable names in recent comics from starting 2005 to 2020.
And even before that, my actual first credit. So I graduated high school in the year 2000. So I'm kind of like a super OG millennial. Okay. And the very first comic book credit I have is actually a pinup in Warlands from Image Comics. That was a Pat Lee and Dreamwave book. And they did a fan art contest. And so at 19, I had a pinup published. And then by 21, no, actually not 21, 20, maybe still 19 going on 20. You might know this name. Before I broke in at Marvel with Frank Cho, I broke into comics with Mark Brooks on a 3-page backup story called Atlas, also published by Image Comics. And that was also before he kind of officially started at Marvel. But we are very much like of a class that came in together with Robert Kirkman, Tony Moore, some of those like Scotty Young. Those were the guys I kind of broke in with. And I also have a credit with Scotty Young at Marvel. It's like a random X-Men Jam issue. I can't remember if it's maybe it's that. I don't think it's that 600. I can't remember because I've got all those different credits. But there's one where I think it's an Iceman page that he did, and I got to color that as part of like a big anthology X-Men issue as well. So yeah, one of my favorite things about my time at Marvel is just literally the list of artists that I was both a fan of, and then I got to work with like full time, like Ed McGuinness. We did several books together, including the Red Hulk. We did Guardians of the Galaxy. We did Avengers, and probably my personal favorite was Spider-Man Deadpool. That's something that I've had on my show banner for years now. Is that first issue cover?
I'm glad you were able to get the opportunity. You departed from in 2020. We just wanted to move on in general. Was COVID factor?
COVID was a big part of it. 2020 is probably when because of COVID, Marvel / Disney had to cut production on comics. So I was my contract was 2 books a month, but they cut it in half essentially. So I took that kind of pay cut, and also it was the first time where I really started feeling burnt out anyway after 15 years. Because one thing I can say that maybe not everybody understands is the color artist is the last one of the creatives in line. So it's very much like a relay race. And, the book's being worked on for all this time, and those pages don't always trickle down to the colorist until about a week and a half from that, like that printing date. So I would be working a lot of all-nighters, Wednesday, Thursday night, going into a Friday deadline. And I would be literally feeling like I'm dying underwater, 6 pages to go on a Friday, and it's a big book like Avengers, and the stress level is just super high. So you do that times 15 years, 2 books a month, and extra covers in there, and it becomes a lot of pressure for a color artist. That's why a lot of us, there's really only a handful that make it like 40 years in comics, who really make it a career forever, and that's just because it's so draining, especially at that level. COVID happens, they cut production, and I had just started really doing like a Comic-Con tour as a guest. So I had already kind of had other income coming in finally, and I was at least fortunate that I could travel off of that 15-year career, that catalog, as far as like signing comics. And my print portfolio is pretty stacked, like you said, with David Finch art, Ed McGuinness, John Buscema, Jack Kirby's. Like I've had Spider-Man credits, at least covers, over Steve Ditko, Gene Colan, all like kind of the classic artists that kind of were before my time, but I was still familiar with them. And so that we're gonna get there. But I did created my own Comic-Con in 2022. So 2020 kind of was the beginning of my career really slowing down, thankful to COVID, I guess. But it really did begin me going on a different path. And what I did was, after being in all these cons, I started seeing the rise of cosplay. And so I decided to create a show that spotlighted that talent, right? And as somebody who's been behind the table at shows and fans coming up to me, a lot of them dressing like the Marvel characters I was working on, I began to like befriend them and find out that, oh wow, you've made your costumes, like the ones that look super legit, like movie level costumes, and then you find out that they've spent months crafting that. So I'm going to put something up for the screen. This is Cosplay World, me as the Greatest Showman. Yeah. That was the first cosplay I wore. I was heavily inspired by both Hamilton and the Greatest Showman in the creation of my show. So very theatrical, very into the costumes, but really just about promoting talent. And that's kind of what I've been doing the last 3 years, is really building that brand, that show. And the tie into comics, like I didn't get it at the time. Like I thought I was really going in a different direction, but I'm now at the point where we've created our own comic that ties into the show, and I have cosplayers becoming those characters at the show this summer. So I've got this whole like world I've created. And again, it came back to comics. Like here I am about to have my very first like self-published comic after 20 years in comics.
And you said that the characters in the book are comic book character cosplayers?
No, the way it worked, well, so I was inspired by the Greatest Showman. So I became the Greatest Showman. And then we created a mascot called, let's see here, this side, Ringo Coswell. And the parallel is he has his Circus of Wonder. It's a lot like the Greatest Showman in like the essence of it, but it has more magic. It has steampunk. It has fantasy. It has, because of the steampunk element, we have mechanical krakens. We have pirates. We have all this kind of like fun adventure so it became like a starting point. And then I was able to just completely go off on like the creative tangent of like, okay, it's the circus, but it's also pirates versus circus. It's quests for magical relics. It's kitsune demon spirit packs that will be revealed by the third issue. But yeah, we've already got the first issue preview, which I'm very happy with. I know it's behind the plastic, but that is currently on Kickstarter. Ends next week. But yeah, it because it's a circus cast, we've had a circus theme at Cosplay World, but now people are already asking me to be those characters at the show. So while the comic isn't about cosplay, people cosplay from every fandom. So all I did was create my own series, and naturally, because of my connection to the show, Cosplay World, people want to cosplay those characters. So it's like this kind of loop now of the comics inspired the cosplayers that inspired me to create a show for them. Now I've created a comic that has inspired them to become those characters for me at my own show.
So, as someone that has spent so many years as a colorist in general, but especially for Marvel superheroes, is there like people that come in costumes and you're just like, that's not the right grain, that's not the right shade for that yellow, that not color costume? Like, do you ever think like that?
No, because I'm an artist first, right? I actually really appreciate the individual like variations that cosplayers do. And one of the first friends that I made in cosplay while I was at a Comic-Con was a guy, TJ Neese. He goes by Gravel Road. He came up to me at a GalaxyCon dressed up as Scarlet Spider. Okay. And I really like that costume because it's essentially like a blue hoodie with like a misprinted spider emblem on it, right? It's very, at least the OG costume is very accessible for somebody starting out. And it has a lot of room kind of for error or individualization because, again, that spider symbol is like at that weird angle where, you're really not going to do that right or wrong.
It's made to look homemade.
And that's one of my favorite things, exactly. We've had people do like giant Apocalypse from X-Men builds. There's a guy named Moody Vision in North Carolina who comes out regularly. And it looks so impressive from a distance. But as you get closer, you can start to see like the duct tape that's like slowly holding like all of the big armor pieces together, kind of coming off, or it's like you could tell things are hand painted and it's like industrial kind of like upholstery foam or whatever kind of the pink foam big sheets you can get at Lowe's. They can just cut up with razor blades and kind of piece together. So that craftiness and that creativity is really at the center of all of it. Whether it be the actual circus of wonder itself, like the making of the comic, and then the people becoming those characters. And kind of, for me, it's as exciting as an artist watching them come to me and be like, what do you think about this fabric or this material? Ringo Coswell, our main character, is a ringmaster, but he has fox ears and a tail on his costume. And so just showing me the fabric for the fur of that tail, it's like, as an artist, there's so many variations that are exciting texture-wise and color-wise. And it's like, is it more white? Is it more silver? Is it more gray? Is it like when you're looking at something like fur, the way that they actually make the materials, the like hair, it'll go from like a light to a dark. Like it has a range of tones. It's not just a flat color. All that is super exciting.
The 2015 dress all over again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Everything is relative as a color artist. Like I could definitely, when somebody says something's green and I'm like, it's really more cyan. it is that dress all over again.
Now, obviously, one of the reasons I was excited to learn more about you by doing research is that like you worked on Star Wars comics. And
yes.
Artists who did interiors in this, Salvador LaRocca. Now, I've mentioned on my channel before that I've had some gripes with Salvador LaRocca's art when it comes to Star Wars main titles, and it has everything to do with like he's picking frames from the movies, and I'm not someone that's going to like so dirt on someone because they. I know this is a very contentious word in comics, but traits. My issue is that it's shots from movie that we know backwards and forward. So you have it in a different scene, like all I could think about is the scene that happens in that movie, not where it's on this other environment. I want to know how you think about that because you've colored for his work before.
Yeah, so two parts of that. I've worked with Salvador really early on at my time at Marvel, probably right after I signed exclusive coloring Frank Cho on Shauna. You know, my contract was for 2 books a month, so then they had to find me another project. And we did some early X-Men together that had no reference to trace or to swipe from or to borrow. So it was all very much, you could tell, like traditional comic book art. Like you're imagining the scene, you're drawing figures from your head. But later on, I got to work on Darth Vader. And, you know, I was so excited to work on that. I've both done the annual with Lino Yu, and then also can't say his name exactly who his name was, but I think the writer though was Jason Aaron at the time on Star Wars or on Vader the series. It was like issues 14 through 16 or 17. It was like only a few. It was like a little mini story, but my excitement kind of went away when you have to work with Lucasfilm. That's the flip side. When you're on that licensed property like Star Wars, they are super controlling on the look. So you are almost encouraged to swipe from the movies because they want it to be film accurate in a lot of ways. Now, not other people are really good about drawing it and making it look original while still kind of like observing the look. Yeah, but with Vader, we have a lot less deadline time too because they want, not only does Marvel edit the book, but Lucasfilm has to edit the book. So I lost a week of
continuity.
Yeah, and I lost a week of my deadline time and time to work on the project. So my assumption is the other artists also have less time because it's a Star Wars property. So the speed you gain by looking at the DVD stills and, you know, for better or worse, drawing over them. You know, maybe you get the speed and you get the accuracy of it looking like the actors or like the real characters. So it's like a double-edged thing of like, you know, I can see exactly why somebody would do that. And at the same time, the excitement of working on Star Wars kind of goes away when you realize you have to work for Lucasfilm and Marvel like simultaneously.
And like I was thinking about like seeing that credit of Star Wars. And I thought about like, you know, is it going to be more stringent because you're taking from something that has like physical representation, like you can like, you know, like a lot of the costumes from those movies are still saved. Like, are you like, they send you photographs? It's like, okay, this is a very specific kind of tan for Han's shirt that you have to use.
Well, not just that, but Vader has had, even though maybe the casual viewer thinks it's the same costume in every rendition, Vader has variations to that costume over not just like the 9 films, but even into the Mandalorian series, right, on Disney Plus. Like, there are subtle variations in the chest piece, to the way the buttons and the dials look around the waist.
Okay. I think you mean Kenobi.
Kenobi, yeah, sorry, not Mandalorian.
Okay.
One of those Disney Plus series, I remember because I've now met those suit actors at cons. And I get to see, they have their action figures. And then I also, when I do sketch covers, so one of the things I do a lot because of the cosplay scene is I reference cosplayers.
Like for people that may not be like super into Star Wars, but if you tell them to look out for this, they would see it, is that in New Hope and Rogue One, Darth Vader's lenses are red in his helmet. And in other movies, like the tunic lines go over the shoulder pads.
Exactly. And that, because he's all black, it's real easy. And the mask is so iconic. Those are like, and in reality, he's only on screen relatively small amounts of time in the big scheme of the overall movie arcs, right? Like it's not.
Yeah,
it's not like
you are counting him as Anakin without the helmet.
Exactly.
A lot of more footage of that, but just him in the suit. Not so much like specific screen time dedicated to him.
Exactly. But he is one of my favorites to draw at shows. So I and what I'll do is again, kind of avoiding that drawing from the movies too much. I look up statues, I look up busts. I got my own statues and busts. That way you can kind of rotate them around and get kind of a unique take.
Yeah.
Pro tip.
Do you think any of the artists for any of these books have access to like 3D models of like actual actors?
I don't know about the actors as much as definitely 3D models nowadays for sure. I don't necessarily know.
He has like a model that looks like enough like Oscar Isaac, so you can make Poe Dameron look bright in the shots.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't know specifically, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, like especially like now, like how easy it is to be like just send those files to somebody. Like I feel like the more projects we get, especially when they're adapting them to comic form, it's going to be a more regular thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that something you could do in like the early days of comics? Like, definitely not for Star Wars, like 70s. No one had scanned anything. It's like a poster image. Like they didn't really have the technology for 3D imagery by that point. But now, like we're in a whole different technological age.
Yeah, people don't like the word AI, but yeah, you could ask AI to generate images, and there's already some artists that are getting kind of accused of like their cover art has now changed because you can ask the AI to generate certain poses for you, and it's a lot like it seems like a natural progression from like the 3D model idea, like you're talking about. Because I was into 3D modeling early in about 2000 with something called like True 3D before Blender. There was always like some kind of free modeling that you could try out, or Bryce 3D for like landscapes. So like, yeah, those things have always been really good. I think they're all just tools and reference, to be honest. Like, you know, an artist can rely too heavily on some of those tools, or you can use it as a like starting point and then branch off and bring in your creativity on top of it.
Before we get into more like the typical questions I ask about Star Wars, is there anything you want to ask me before we hop into that?
Whew. I hope we don't get too deep because I don't want to feel like a too much of a noob or disappoint anybody, because my time at Marvel had been 95% non-Star Wars, and then I was just super lucky to get that Vader annual with Lin Yu because it was just such beautiful artwork, and it was now there's a great example of like, you know, they could do a Vader movie and I'd be very happy because that comic was just every page, every panel is Vader looking badass. And no, I won't ask any questions, but I will say that, you know, all things are kind of connected in some ways in life. And so even with my new series, Circus of Wonder, and even though it's circus versus pirates, our kind of perceived bad guy is very Vader-esque in that he has a story of starting out as a ringmaster himself. And so he was the good guy, like an Anakin, who gets wronged and slowly turns to the dark side, and who actually builds himself a mighty mech suit that he comes back in to seek his revenge. And one thing you learn about like the archetypes of villains is, you know, behind every baddie in a really crazy armor is a really hurt person. And so I will show you. Let's see if you can see that. That's our pirate mech king, or a pirate king with the mighty mech suit. Very Warhammer-esque.
Yeah.
So, you know, even though it's not Vader, he has that kind of like, he did build himself a suit of armor to hide behind, to protect him.
We met each other through Leighton Cobb, who is a friend of mine that I used to hang out with at the 757 Comic Creators in Norfolk at a writer center. And he knew you because he's really into comics. He does indie comics. I do indie comics, but like he publishes a lot more than I do. It takes me forever to make the art. So big ups to him, and I'm going to have him as a guest soon enough. Now, I would like to know, how did you get into Star Wars, and what's your connection with the franchise now, aside from like obviously doing coloring for Darth Vader?
Yeah, I'm still kind of like a generalist in the Star Wars world. So You know, the OG movies were kind of in the back of my experience, but really the newer trilogies. I was a huge Natalie Portman fan growing up. Like, I loved The Professional, so I've kind of been on her career from the beginning based on my age. So when she was cast in as Queen Amidala, I was like I thought the first couple of movies were okay. I guess I kind of hated the overuse of that CGI at the time because Lucas was really kind of trying to be. He was being revolutionary again, right? Like, he revolutionized sound design and special effects in the first movies, and then he just took it to another level in the next set. But I definitely watched those, The Phantom Menace, and all of the newer stories. And then more recently, I definitely was a fan of, was it The Last Jedi? I kind of like The Last Jedi. But I am a Vader fan, so I want a project that's all Vader all the time.
It's the title of the movie, Darth Vader all the time.
Well, one of my last Marvel books was Avengers Forever, and I was like, oh my God, am I going to be working on Avengers Forever?
Yeah.
But Vader Forever I could get down
with. My journey with Star Wars, I'm kind of the middle generation of I had watched the VHSs of the original trilogy when I was very little, and I wasn't really old enough to go to the theater to go see Phantom Menace. But one of the first movies I saw in theater was Attack of the Clones, and that was when I was 4. Nice.
My fond memories of the original 3 were definitely Return of the Jedi. They're not the Wookiees. We're the little guys. Ewoks. Yeah, I mean, they knew what they were doing with the kid generation of the Ewoks. You're like, oh my God, they're so cool and cute at the same time. It's like before Rocket Raccoon.
Live action kid movies. They came out with a cartoon. They had a comic run. They had a toy run. So they knew what they were doing.
Right. And actually, this is like a sign of my OG millennial status, but I definitely, when I'm thinking now of the most epic Star Wars video when the internet came out, was that Star Wars kid video where he's in the AV green room doing his
I've had very up and down opinions when it comes to the prequels growing up. Starting off, you couldn't tell me that they weren't the greatest thing ever as a little kid. That's seeing them in more critical eye, and I'm like, well, it's kind of a mixed bag relationship, but I still I'm never not gonna love them. Even though I do not like the lines of I don't like sand, it's rough, of course, and everything. To me, that line sucks. But I still the movie has such an attachment to me. And by the time the sequels started coming out, I was starting to enter adulthood. I saw Force Awakens when I was 18. Last Jedi I love even more. Rise Skywalker have a lot of issues with the narrative. Do not hate it. Just have a lot of issues with how the movie panned out. And as part of the reason that I'm fueled, you want to know how much of a big Star Wars fan I am? I wrote a 136 page fan script rewrite of Episode 9.
Wow. So, wow. Well, hopefully you get to do something with that. I know somebody in Richmond, Nick Justice, does bootleg Batman. You could definitely. Well, I'm not necessarily encouraging people to skirt copyright, but when you do indie books, you can kind of do whatever you want as long as it doesn't get too big.
Exactly. Just release it for free. I'm doing a audio-visual aid. So people actually will absorb it. It's gonna have sound effects. It's gonna have music and all that, and a little bit of drawing, but also throwing in some images. But before I can do that, I'm doing a very long review of the Ewok cartoon. It's gonna be because no one else is doing it. I'm picking up the nerdum slack on that. And I'm gonna do Easter egg breakdown video. I'm working on a novelization of my script.
Well, geez, you're going to be busy, but I do like that idea of trying to find the lanes that other people haven't taken. So those Ewok cartoons. I'm sure there's going to be an audience when you put that on YouTube who are like, "Oh my God, those are." I've been waiting for somebody to talk about those.
I've been waiting for someone to talk well over an hour. Cartoon. That's pretty silly.
Do you remember Wizard Magazine?
I do know about Wizard Magazine, but I never like owned any actual copies of it. Now it was.
I came across
for like comic fans for like well over a decade. Yeah, I do know about that.
Well, Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor, I came across their YouTube kayfabe because they were doing not really reviews. They were just going back and revisiting the Wizard magazines on YouTube. They'd have like a camera overhead and they just flip through every page. They go through the old ads, all of the artists that were listed in the top 10, what books were coming out that Marvel was promoting. It was really interesting because, now everything is all online. But back then, like the magazine really was where you went to get like your news on what's coming out, or like Bart Sears was doing like the How to Draw Comics, little section in there. And then Greg Capullo took over, their How to Draw section. So you get to learn about like perspective and character design from pros in Wizard Magazine. And then Wizard Magazine had Wizard World Con that Galaxy Con is now kind of replaced in a certain number of cities like Richmond.
Yeah. It started from humble beginnings, but then like it became a juggernaut. Like that they had sales that would rival like some of the biggest comics during that time period. I mean, obviously not like the flash in the pan like Gen 13 or X-Men like by Jim Lee. Not that level, but still like some of the regular titles they were doing well against.
Well, they were definitely outselling modern comics.
Yeah.
I can give you.
That's unfortunate truth.
I can give your audience a little behind the scenes on my Marvel contract for sales and royalties. They would do royalties after a book sold 50,000 copies. So at the time I was working for them, the number one selling books were maybe doing 100,000 versus like 500,000 a decade before. And so you had to be on a real top 10 book to even get royalties because that first 50,000, they're just recouping expenses and making pure profit. And then after that, they start cutting everybody a little side check.
Yeah, I've heard a bit murmurs here and there, like of how Marvel doesn't like. They're not the best as far as like giving back to the people that work for them, especially like your typical artist and your colorists and your inkers. I have heard plenty of arguments over that. It's not just like, oh, this happened in the olden days. Like, no, it's still there's kind of a thing. I would say. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah. So I was definitely the first to color the Hulk red, but you don't see my name in the Captain America Falcon movie at the end. It's just the writer and the penciler. Right. So, especially with a pivotal character where the color is kind of a big part of the name and what they look like, I thought that was a real stupid, easy slight. Like they didn't have to pay anything to give me that little mention, but they have 1,000 other artists that do all the CGI and the backgrounds in the movies, and so I'm not really like, I should have been in there with all of that. I mean, again, it's not that difficult. They looked at the comics, and it's right there on the cover. It's with Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness. They got mentioned, but not.
They'll wait through adding another 100 names to the credits. They'll say, and they'll wait for the after credit scene. They'll be fine.
Right, exactly. And actually, it goes Jeff Loeb, Ed McGuinness, and they had space in the same line to put Dexter and myself.
Yeah, like I know Sebastian Stan, who plays Bucky, was the person who had to drive Edward Baker, who like revamped the character of Bucky to make him the Winter Soldier, to see the premiere of Winter Soldier. Like no one gave him like RSV ticket. Like to me, that's madness.
Yeah, well,
he's not like a character that's like super problematic. So you can't be seen with him. Like he's just a regular dude who writes comics.
Yeah, but you also start to realize that like Marvel Studios and Marvel Comics are two separate businesses. Like,
that is true.
and it's you think
they're not the same. They're not.
they have a few of the same, not produce. Well, no, I mean, really, they have the one that overlaps is Marvel TV. So like Jeff Loeb, famous for Batman, but also Red Hulk and a ton of other stuff, had been head of Marvel TV at Netflix.
Other series like what is it? Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk
Yeah.
Gray.
Yeah, all that, and then he was also executive producer on the Netflix Daredevil, all of the Marvel Netflix to a point, pretty much until Disney got involved with the Disney Plus and wanted to bring it all over there, so they canceled all those deals. But he was one of those that kind of crossed over. But short of that, like the two sides of the entertainment are kind of separated.
One thing you can know is that every time I interact with someone on Star Wars YouTube, they get a rap name. Now, some people I've not told them because I didn't think of the name until later, but I have one in the clip for you.
Ooh, I'm excited.
So, Jason Keith, your rap name is Tay Keith, who is a producer on a lot of more trap songs. So you can put that in your resume.
Well, you should know that my inner monologue sounds like Rick Ross. I'm a boss, like a real deep, growly, like aggressive guy. That's my inner monologue is always Rick Ross. But yeah, Tay Keith, I like that.
I said my rap name is Easy E. If you didn't know.
Oh, R.I.P. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a while. So it's just not like a recent passing. But obviously in the forefront of like the development of gangster rap back in the day. Now, another thing that you should know about my channel is that I like to entertain Star Wars in-universe conspiracy theories. So, like, I'm not a tinfoil hat kind of guy. I'm just like in Star Wars universe. Like, what are some conspiracies? Have you watched either the Clone Wars 3D animated cartoon or Bad Batch?
A little bit of Clone Wars, but okay. Bad Batch, nope. But Clone Wars a little bit.
Okay, so in one of the earlier seasons, there's a kind of kaiju-esque lizard creature called a Zillibeast. My conspiracy says that Rey has some Zillibeast DNA.
Well, that's pretty wild.
People make fun of me for, and I make jokes about all the time.
Oh man! And you said that you're not tinfoil hat, yeah? You're just like, where'd you pull that out of?
Okay, my rationale is, so we know that because of Rise of Skywalker, Rey is genetically related to the clone Palpatine.
Okay, yeah.
And we know that in Bad Batch, we see like a Legends concept coming back into canon of Mount Tantus reanimated the Emperor doing clone shit, experimentation at this base. But in Bad Batch, we see that they take in a Zillibeast too.
Okay.
And in the episode with the Zillibeast of the Clone Wars, Palpatine is very interested in like this seemingly indestructible thing that can absorb electricity. So I'm like, was he genetically altered and spliced to be part Zillo? So I'm like, if that's the case, he pass it down to his technically his daughter because his son is a clone. It's odd, Star Wars it gets like this in the minutia of different books and novels.
It's definitely a complicated family tree, and now you're trying to bring in cross DNA, which I like. Hey, it makes sense. I see where you're going with it. You really should help. You should help add to the canon by writing some novels.
Maybe. I feel like if this gets explored in the actual canon, I'm like owed a check.
You're never gonna get it.
Good point. But
they make you sign a work for hire that says they own everything. You may not. You will definitely not get credit. You're better off if you create your own version of Star Wars, but rename everything.
Yeah, kind of like how George did when he saw Flash Gordon. He's like, "Oh, I want to do my Flash Gordon," and it became Star Wars.
I mean, that really is how everything starts. We're all inspired by something.
You just want to make sure it has some, your voice in it.
Yeah, and it sounds like as somebody you've done some writing, and even though you're inspired by Star Wars, like you can't really keep yourself out of it. And also, there's like a real altruism with almost every artist. They draw themselves. Everything's a self-portrait, quite honestly. So in some cases, like a lot of guys, when they draw their male characters, because we look in the mirror a lot when we draw faces, you end up inevitably putting yourself in the work, both like literally and, deeper into the story side of things. Like I definitely am in my Circus of Wonder. I definitely am Ringo Coswell and Captain Draven. Like there's parts of me that are literally both of those characters. And so you can't separate the artist from the art.
Now I backed up my insane conspiracy with stuff that happens in the movies.
Okay.
Last trailer we see Rey gets a bad burn on her arm. The next movie it's gone because the prop team put like the leather band in the wrong section. Like it's supposed to be higher in the shoulder, but it's like right here. So I'm like, isn't that like some kind of cell regeneration like a lizard does?
Oh, geez. Well, now you got me wanting to watch the movies again with a closer eye. And that Bad Batch, I haven't seen a lick of that, but that sounds interesting.
Like, if you can appreciate the more quiet moments in like the Clone Wars 3D animated show, like Bad Batch will definitely be of your sensibility. Like it definitely reflects more of the later seasons and the older seasons because the older seasons are a little more fluffy and jovial. It gets a little more serious. Like it's intended to like grow up with the audience, like the kids.
I like that. I got a almost 11-year-old son. I wonder if he'd like it.
Maybe we could get a kick out of it. I've also pointed out how the Emperor like absorbs electricity. He becomes more powerful. Like it seems like very in the same vein of like the Silver Beast. When Rey is able to calm the giant snake. I said, lizard recognize lizard.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you've really given this some thought.
You remember when Rey sees the evil version of herself in a vision?
Yes.
What's in the mouth of that evil version? Sharp, razor, lizard-like teeth.
Wow. Yeah, you're a nut.
I'll take that with pride. I think we've been calling that.
It means you're paying attention and you're really invested in it, and I like that.
Yeah. So
whether or not you're actually true or right, you definitely have connected. You've connected the dots in your own way, which is what conspiracy theories do. There's a way to weave that story to make sense. You know what I mean? Like, and you've done just that.
Yeah. So, you can see why, like me bringing this up, like it becomes like a reoccurring joke on other people's channels.
I like it though. I like it.
This conspiracy, I don't believe. It's too funny not to say. I'm sure, in some kind of semblance, you're a fan of the Indiana Jones movies, right?
Yeah. Again, we in our Circus of Wonder, there's a quest for a sodalite stone. So like this whole idea of quests and adventure, Indiana Jones is right up there on that. Even down to the we have a sodalite stone skull. So there was Indiana Jones on the crystal skull, and we're going over like, well, how big is it? And I go back to the original one with I can never remember what that kind of like golden relic where he's like replacing the sandbag and he's taking it out, whatever that was called. But I was like, I was looking at that kind of in reference to the size of things. But yes, Indiana Jones, go on.
I'm glad to hear that you're an Indiana Jones fan, because maybe you'll be able to follow my breadcrumbs a little bit.
Also, I mean, Harrison Ford just played the Red Hulk, so come on, now it comes full circle.
Red Hulk, Han Solo, Indiana Jones.
There's a reason why you're never gonna. There's a reason why you're never gonna see him at a Comic-Con signing autographs. He's way too iconic, and the one time they did mail-ins, it's like $1,000 for an auto. Like his list of credits is gonna exempt him from Comic-Con until he's like, if he ever is at a Comic-Con, you know something's wrong with the money. Like, and also now he's on like Yellowstone or whatever on AMC. Like he has never stopped having huge hits.
Legend, and like no one can take that away from him.
Exactly. I aspire to that.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with Indiana Jones, and you mentioned Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you're familiar with Mutt Snow. With Mutt. And I said, damn it, I already spoiled it. Mutt, in this conspiracy, says that he's also Snoke.
Wow.
Now, I don't believe it. Once again, it's too funny not to bring up. So, at the end of that movie, they just all kind of go home after seeing aliens, and I'm just like, what? Let's have a wedding? Which character seems like he would go back? To me, it's the greenest of them.
And George Lucas is like a producer on those Indiana Jones movies, right?
Not only is he a producer, but he's done a bit of writing for many of the scripts in like that franchise. Right.
So there's your insider connection for sure, right? Like he's in there. Like
they're all Lucasfilm umbrella movies. Like the last Indiana Jones was released by Disney.
Exactly. So again, every artist puts themselves in the work. Like when you've created universes like he has, that kind of tie-in is maybe not so coincidental.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, once again, Mutt seems like the character that would go back. And I said either he, like, I think he like takes a chunk of like alien painting from one of the balls, and either he gets abducted in Peru, America, or serving in Vietnam.
Well, I don't want to think about getting abducted in Peru because I'm going to be there next month.
I doubt there's going to be aliens from another dimension looking for you. I highly doubt it.
Well, you know, if you haven't traveled the world yet, you have no idea what's out there, right? And I'm going to be there with Lou Ferrigno. Maybe they're there trying to pick up the Green Hulk.
Yeah, say that they start experimenting on him, so they look more like he looks more like they do. They're all gray and lanky. They put a cybernetic implant scarring his brain to tap into not having that true father figure that he wanted. So when he becomes a evil mentor for Kylo Ren, also being pickled and cloned, he taps into his anger. Just like, you know, your dad just looks like my dad, and I want him to be dead. He's living vicariously through Kylo Ren to kill his father.
I had no idea we were going down this road when I signed up for this pod.
I brought this up with other guests who have like their own Star Wars podcast. One of them said, you know, I kind of want Snoke to have like his like, instead of the Knights of Ren, he has the like the Riders of Ren, and they're like, you know, Sith themed greasers.
I kind of hope you do get to work on some Star Wars properties. You are a hardcore fan.
To me, I think it would be a great idea. You know, the What If TV show on Disney.
Yes.
Do Star Wars Infinities. Do the basic equivalent, because in the comics back in like the early 2000s, they were like, oh, this is like a what if scenario for what if this had happened in the original trilogy, and then they have a whole another timeline events. I'm like, to me, it would be perfect to just call a series like that. Maybe get the same animators or different animators. Who cares? And
Exactly.
you're not tied by the constraints of this actor is in their 60s. Like we can just replace him with a different voice.
Exactly. Just like Rick and Morty, they got a whole new cast.
Yeah, like you remember in like an idea popped in my head for a possible episode. You might be familiar more with this character because he's reappeared in the comics. But are you familiar with Kitster? Benai?
I'm not off the top of my head.
He's like a little South Asian child that's like a friend of Anakin in Phantom Menace.
Okay.
He's the one that says, "This is Wizard."
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so I was like, what if they did an episode of Star Wars Infinities where like we see he grew up and he's like a bounty hunter, and we bring back the child actor who's like in their 40s now to like do a voiceover.
No, that actually makes sense.
Yeah, that would be kind of fun. But yeah, like they brought back that character into like the comics recently, and like he like works with what is it? One of Padme's handmaidens who's like investigating how she would have died, and they're like going against Darth Vader.
You're slowly losing me. You're losing me, but you're also inspiring me to go a little deeper into watching some of these movies again.
Now, this next conspiracy, I don't think you need to watch much to like follow my breadcrumbs, other than like a deleted scene.
Okay.
And it's a deleted scene from the original trilogy. Now,
Okay, I'm listening.
My philosophy is that if the movie or the canon overall doesn't really contradict the deleted scene, then it happened.
Okay.
This is a deleted scene where it's after Luke got smacked up by the Wampa, and he had got out of the back of the tank, and he's on the bed, and it cuts perfectly to like when Han says, "Oh, you look like you pulled the ears off of Gundar." It's that section. It is a deleted scene, and you can tell because it still has like the grain and like the little splotches everywhere in how it was recorded. But it's an interaction between Leia and Luke where Han's not around, and they get real close to kissing, and they have very flirty dialogue because obviously, like, once again, they had no idea that they're going to retcon them to be siblings.
Right.
So to me, I'm like, we already know for a fact that Luke was a simp for his sister. But I think based on this, that Leia was also a bit, because like when she's cut off by like, C-3PO, doing cock blocking, because that's a reoccurring joke. She's disappointed that she didn't get the kiss. I'm like, you wouldn't be disappointed unless if you like wanted to engage with that really.
I mean, in the end, it's very Game of Thrones. But it is interesting to think.
Very interesting.
Did you have you seen this deleted scene, or is this you just filling in the gaps?
This deleted scene, I watched it many times to make sure I'm not crazy. Also in the comics during this time period, they're kissing a lot.
Wow!
The first Legends novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye. There's internal monologue from Luke where he's like describes Leia's voice as being like a sweet fruit. I'm like, that's very sexually charged language. Yeah,
they were definitely going one direction and then went the other, right? Yeah.
But you're saying that they were going on a different trajectory.
Yeah, so you never actually get that moment, right? Like it's kind of delayed gratification.
Yeah. I mean, you did get a quality reaction from Han realizing that they're brother and sister. He's like, huh? I think that's one of the funniest moments in the original trilogy. He's just going, huh? Because I feel like that's how we feel like watching it.
You're right, because you were like, they were just about to hook up.
Yeah. They were really playing with like a love triangle here. But apparently, there's also a retcon of like, not only are they brother and sister, but Leia somehow knew, which brings up a whole host of questions of like what was going through your brain. But anyway, I think that's the end of me talking about conspiracies for now. What would you say is your favorite, least favorite, and underrated when it comes to the movies? And I say least favorite because I think worst is a little too emotionally charged negatively.
I mean, that's an easy one. That's the Jar Jar Binks, right? Like, that was one of those horrible characters. And are you glitching? Am I glitching?
I'm still here. I'm still
Okay, good. Yeah, Jar Jar Binks.
Oh,
That was a dramatic long pause.
I was talking about movies.
Yes, my least favorite thing was Jar Jar Binks.
That's a character. I said, like, what's your least favorite movie, your favorite movie, and your underrated movie?
Okay. You mean in Star Wars or in anything?
Yeah, Star Wars, yeah.
All right. Most favorite, least favorite, and underrated. I may not be a big enough Star Wars fan to have all of that nuance, right? Like, of the newer ones, The Last Jedi is still kind of like, I like that one. I like that a lot. I think people. It's your favorite one?
Not only is my favorite Star Wars movie, it's my favorite movie.
Well, so that's the thing. Like, I think I prefer like Spider-Verse still maybe.
Okay.
But in the newer Star Wars movies, I feel like there was just so much hate around all of them when they came out that there's no kind of reconsideration for what qualities there were. And so for me, again, as more of a generalist when it comes to that universe, like, I was excited. I thought it has awesome visuals. I think the story's great. Like, it gave me a lot of what I wanted out of a Star Wars movie. So, I know it's not the OG characters. That's a huge part of people's complaints, right? It's like it's the newer generation kind of, but
that's one of the reasons why a lot of people that hate that movie really hate it, because they feel like they misused characters like Luke and Leia, who are from the original trilogy.
Right. But I think a lot of people.
Like, that's a Last Jedi painting that I did of Luke. That's how much I love that movie. Is that I did that for this project.
Yeah, I like that. And I've been trying to figure out what that was. And now that you say that, I'm like, I see it exactly. Yeah, he's got the grayer beard and everything and the longer hair. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of maybe doesn't tie up the old storylines while introducing the new. They just, people hated Kylo Ren so much, right? Like,
but like I remember like initial reactions from like Force Awakens. A lot of people were very divided about his character, but they saw like a lot more nuance in him in Last Jedi, and they're like they could see where he was coming from, even though like he's still like evil bastard.
Right, and it was just too memeable with like the shirt off and like the wide waist. It was just like
Ben Swallow.
I don't think. Yeah, exactly. I don't think. I really wonder how the original trilogy would hold up if it was in our generation of haters and memes and all that. Like, because the culture has been so different over the entire span of the Star Wars universe of projects that like it's hard to keep it going that long while still keeping it popular.
Yeah, and I'm someone that's old enough to remember when like the prequels were really divisive in the fandom. And it's not until like a decade later or more where there's more revisionist history when like some of these, especially the grifter types, like trying to like attack the new movies. They say, "Oh well, the prequels and George were doing everything right." And like, That's not what the people said.
again, I've said my piece. I was just a Natalie Portman fan, so like I go into things wanting to like something about it, and so she was enough to get me in the door. And maybe I wasn't as much of a Hayden Christensen fan, but by the last ones, like Ray, people hate Ray because she was a newer character, but like I gave her as much kind of my attention as any of the OGs because you're watching a new. Maybe because I'm not such the biggest Star Wars fan, I have that little bit of more. I can accept the new stuff a bit more, but I try to be objective with my art viewing in general, and so if it's a good movie, it's a good movie, and I don't have to. It doesn't have to have all that baggage,
Yeah, to me, I think it's very important to try your best to put the baggage at the door before you go into the theater, and then you pick it up after you've seen it. Like you give it time to gestate, to weigh the pros and cons. If you're just gonna be colored, like going, just don't like you're gonna have a terrible time, and like you're not gonna be able to pick up on anything good that is actually in it.
Well, I think I'm definitely going to go back and watch The Last Jedi again. Now that you've said that's your favorite, one of your favorite movies.
I've watched it like 14 times.
Oh, that makes me happy for a guy who's such a Star Wars fan because a lot of them were so harsh on the newer movies. I'm glad to hear that like you've enjoyed everything, and then the last one is still your favorite.
Like, some I can say that like I know a lot of fans won't say is that I don't hate Jar Jar. Actually, not only am I working on novelization of my episode 9 script, I'm working on novelization about the entire life of Jar Jar through his eyes.
Well, again, there's a theme here of where you like to take the untraveled path.
Underrated or sometimes I'm just gonna say hated. I was trying to think of a better vocabulary word than hated, but I just had a brain fart.
Well, I feel bad now insulting him so much, but in my opinion, you could have just completely cut him out.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's fair, but like I can also understand very specifically like why they crafted narrative, like because if you take him out of like the actual movie that we got, then a lot of things don't happen.
Right.
Write it differently that you don't need it because like you're the writer, like you can make practically anything happen.
You could put a different character. You can put a different character in that role or that position as far as like affecting the story.
People dislike him is just the presentation of the character. It's not necessarily much what he, like the character, like what's going through his psyche is just kind of like he's a bit too silly and wacky.
And that the voice too, the voice and the accent having like, again, that one I've definitely avoided rewatching. But I remember just having kind of this, Star Wars maybe always been a little critiqued for lack of some diversity. And so it felt like kind of a heavy-handed, like Jamaican-esque weird.
It's been talked about, and I see both sides of the argument of people saying, "Oh, there's no racialized metaphor," and other people say there is, and you're silly for not saying it. Like I try to like see in both sides, but at the same time, like George, I don't think hates any race. I just think he kind of suffers from like kind of like a soft white ignorance. Like he's like, oh, look at like the stereotype of like this kind of alien that's supposed to be representational. Like to me, like the Tusken Raiders are absolutely Arab Bedouins.
Yeah, and you could see some. Usually, his references,
Africans.
His references are usually pretty easy to pinpoint, right? Like it's we're talking space Buddhist samurais, right?
Yeah, and to me, this is definitely one that's a bit more poetic in the way they do it. I think Yoda is like an old like Chinese kung fu master, like
yes,
that he embodies.
He's a little bit of the Buddha and Sun Tzu and all that, right?
Exactly.
He doesn't even need a suit of armor. He's so enlightened with his use of the Force, right? Like,
so did you get into like the different Star Wars comics to actually like read them? Like, is there ones that you like or you think people should check out more?
no, I've just along the way I've got to meet people like Howard Chaykin,
Okay.
who I know was kind of an early icon. I don't know if he's iconic as much, but I know I see him at shows and he signs a lot of those old Star Wars books. And then I'm like, oh, I have seen those before. Those do look cool. Like, no, I probably didn't read a Star Wars comic until the newer, who was it, Jason Aaron and John Cassidy, like 2000s, like newer version, like, and that was mostly because I was a huge fan of his artwork and Laura Martin's coloring. Like, I'm a, you know, I hate to be like this, but I'm more of a visual artist first, and so there's a whole lot of comics I've colored that I never really read. I read the script enough to take direction. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm so much more interested in staring at visuals in some ways than I will go down like super deep into a lot of story. So I look and read. I look at more and then read less, and I hate to admit that.
That's fair. Is there any colorists that you're just like, damn, I wish I like had their sensibilities to do it quite like them?
Yeah, really. I'm glad that's a good question, because that's right up my alley. Yeah. So I came into comics when everything really became digital coloring.
Right.
So I absolutely went out of my way to see the comics that had been hand colored or painted. So, you know, early Frank Miller was all colored by, I believe she was his wife, Lynn Varley. So she's doing like watercolor, you know, hand colored comics. And color, when you mix it versus pick it on the screen, you know, pigment behaves different, right? And so visually, when you mix oranges and blues, you get these beautiful neutrals that, you know, digitally just look like, yeah, it just looks like mud. And once people start doing digital coloring, there was a tendency for things to get darker and kind of muddier and harder to see the original ink. So Lynn Varley, we talked about Jeff Loeb. He worked on a book with Tim Sale called Superman for All Seasons, something like that. And I think, what's that?
He loves the seasons. He loves the solid.
Yeah. But that also was hand colored, and now I'm blanking on the guy's name. He didn't do a whole lot of comic work. He was an illustrator, the guy who colored that. But in Heavy Metal has a ton of hand painted comics. Anything by Mobius, like Jean Girard. It's funny that because my career was so digital heavy, and now everybody is drawing it digitally, coloring it digital. I go out of my way to see that hand colored, hand painted, you know, traditional illustrators. And the good thing is it's 2025, and there are a lot of artists that are still using traditional materials. And so that's something, seeing your paintings behind you, for example, like I can see
the Luca is the only one that I made. The other ones are my dad. So you can see the African purple for the tree. Sorry, it's just an art.
Nice. But in your painting back there from The Last Jedi, like you've got the red is affecting everything. Like his gray and his hair even has a red tint to it. Like,
well, because the underpainting is just red starting off. So
nice.
It actually bleeds through a bit.
Exactly, and that's something I did. So in my digital color career, I pulled a lot of influences from traditional painting techniques. So like what you just said, you know, in comics, we work with flat colors first and then build the rendering on top of that. And I would oftentimes put one flat color down over everything just to set mood. So like that red you just talked about there, and that just creates unity, right?
Yeah. I'm glad I have you as someone that has worked in the comic industry as far as coloring, because like one thing that I've had like a pet peeve about as far as coloring when it comes to comics is that around the time when you got in, like the digital coloring like exploded, and it's like let's go back to the old art, and they gave it a lot of like garish coloring, like too hypersaturated, and they were released into like collected volumes. And I want to know like how you feel about that. Like I felt like it lost the nuance. It lost like it's trying to be like it feels too much like 60s pop art almost.
Yes, you're talking about going back in and doing like the modern recoloring of the classics.
Yeah,
so if any of your audience is really kind of interested in this topic, they should follow Jose Villarrubia on Facebook. He's a comic book colorist, an artist, an art teacher. I think he's a department chair of illustration at Maryland Institute of Art. So MICA, I think, is the school. And
I'm right across from Micah. I'm in downtown Baltimore.
Yeah, so he lives right there, and he has made it a mission to put on blast, the modern recoloring of the classics, where he'll show you the original and the new stuff, and he's like, hands down, you ruined it with the modern coloring. Like, there's again that nuance of the older coloring and the fact that they had to do more with less, right? So they would master, using blocks of color to separate. Yeah, but so Jose Villarrubia is somebody who, if you really want a lot of examples of modern, recoloring gone bad, but also he's made it his whole thing to be one of the guys that they go to recolor. I think he's done. He may have. You're gonna have to follow up on that. I know he's currently doing some Conan books, and I'm not sure if those are recolorings or not. But he's really big on Richard Corbin and trying to bring out more of his work to a newer audience. And I think some of that may be recoloring. But yeah, so I've colored Kirby. You could say recolored Kirby a couple times, and actually Jim Lee, a modern master. There's a really classic Wolverine image that I got to recolor, which is him standing in like some woods in the classic yellow and blue suit. And it's so 90s with his really heavy big lines, like hatching style. But I kept, in the case of the Kirby, my mission was to not make it look new, plastic, and shiny and all rendered out like we see with a lot of modern comics. It was this hybrid of respect that his art was done at a different time period where it's expected to be colored flatly. And, model it just enough to add some light and shadow. But don't be hitting it with little highlights on the nose and little rim lights around the edge. I mean, there's some controversy over the newer Frank Miller covers that he's doing, and it's not Lynn Varley.
He's a controversial man.
He is, but his style as he gets older is getting more simple and kind of retro in a weird way.
Yeah, and more jagged.
But I feel like there might be a little less hate if it was colored a little bit differently, because there is a perfection of blending the black and white and the color that can evolve it to be awesome, or the coloring can kind of like mediocre it, or kind of like limit its potential. And I just feel like some of his hate is like, from my perspective, the coloring isn't matching his art, because Frank Miller's on a different lane right now, and the coloring is still kind of, it's like fighting it.
I think when it comes to especially the older art, like the thing that should be like you're gonna re-release it is try to do the best to have a little bit of the sensibilities of modern coloring, but still stay true to as much as you can of the original. Like you don't want to like just overwrite it and it feels like something completely different. Like was it Vince Coletta inking? Like it just like a lot of it gets lost in translation. And you don't want that.
I will show some grace and say and kind of push the business side of it, but the whole going through the archives and re-releasing something from a Marvel and DC and having somebody recolor it, they're not usually spending the money to get the best in the business to recolor them. They oftentimes do use studios. And my guess is that their budget and their rates are very low. So there's a reason why you're not getting high quality. And also those projects, especially the reprints, they're a business money grab. They're not repaying to get the art done. They're updating the coloring because they feel like in their perspective that it needs to be looking more modern, at least to be sold again, right? Otherwise you just go back in and buy the old volume. So if we're going to recollect it, we want to modernize it a little bit, but they also want to do it on the cheap. And so, unfortunately, nobody really ends up all that happy, right? Because people are like, it doesn't look as good as the original. And I'm sure they're not selling as many copies. No.
I mean, a lot of those collected volumes of older books are they're like, this is going to the downbound collector that just wants to have it on the shelf of like multiple Fantastic Four, like multiple compilations. Like that's why they sell like the newsprint ones with no color.
Yeah, that's the better way to do it too. Those like Marvel Essentials or whatever.
Yeah. I got a couple of those.
I got back when I was wanting to look at a lot more of like classic Kirby and John Buscema. I got those Marvel Essentials because they've got his Fantastic Four and with the Wolverines they've got like some Silvestri in there. And you just get to see the line work, you don't have any, and it's funny coming from a guy who does color, but it's like, if you want to study one thing, you kind of got to isolate it. So if you're really into like learning about Kirby, take away the distraction of any kind of color period. And now you can just see the artwork. And I have a couple of artist editions too, where they're just black and white, but they're full size, like Walt Simonson's Thor run. That's a really great one where, again, no color, but you're really seeing the master in black and white and storytelling.
Are you ready for, I think it's good for us to wrap up. We've been going for
Yeah.
Do you know what a glup shido is?
Do I know what?
What a glup shido is?
No.
It's internet slang.
It sounds like a slur.
It's not a slur. It's kind of a meme online of someone says, "Hey, look, this new Star Wars thing has my favorite character, Glup Shido." It's just a kind of like nothing character that doesn't really do much, or just maybe in the background, maybe has a few lines. Like there's like a good example, I think, of like a Glup Shido is R5D4, the droid that explodes in episode 4, the one that Luke wanted to get originally. I think he was a Glup Shido up until they kept putting him in like different shows like Mandalorian. He kind of came out of the Glup Shido is because he's like so well known now. But
right,
the less screen time they get, usually the more Glup Shido they are.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And this lines up with your interest in like the more obscure.
If they're more obscure, the more gluppy they are.
Exactly. Okay.
Do you know the Glup Shido of the day, whose name is Nye Fesco?
You're educating me. Go on.
Nye Fesco was a Zexto confidence trickster from Veteran Troikin. Born into poverty, he roamed the streets unemployed and began to work for Freon Devron gang and a factory worker producing counterfeit Gascano pod racing merchandise. Swindling and smuggling became his specialty. He snitched on his boss to the authorities about a tax debt because he grew tired of it. I'm going to get to where he's from and give you an image. He laid low on Tatooine after running from the police. There he served as a vendor on Bunta Eve Classic in 32 BBY. He wasn't aware that Draven was in the crowd after they had a public fight, and both were sent to jail.
And where are you
don't worry,
reading?
I got some imagery of this character, so you can see what your boy Nye Fesco looks like.
And what is that? What is that from right there?
He shows him Phantom Menace.
Okay.
He's a vendor at the pod race.
Where did you read that description from? He's got a whole lot of backstory.
Well, my version is just like a slightly paraphrased version of what you see on the Wikipedia article on this character. I recognize this character, like, you know, he has like maybe a second and a half of screen time, like just vending counterfeit merchandise to the masses. But yeah, I did not know about the backstory of like him and this like other gang member and him on the run from the police. As a matter of fact, I didn't know he was selling merchandise at first, because when I looked at the image, I didn't know this was like plastic toys or whatever. I thought they were like fried food or some kind of fish, because that's what it looks like to me.
Okay, yeah.
Like I went years just assuming he was selling food to these people, and it like obviously he has like this stupid ass foam hat. Like it's supposed to be like evocative of like a vendor like NASCAR.
Right.
Like, that's
yeah,
kind of vibe I get from him.
Well, I don't know where you're going with that. Other than now that I'm kind of creating my own comics, I realize the more of a backstory you give a character, the better they are in a way. Because, like, you know, who knows what I think from storytellers' perspective nowadays, like you give them a backstory because you don't know if you might use them for something else. Like, right? Like maybe there's some other overlap in the future, or they're going to come in contact with them again, and it makes it needs to be, you know, part of their backstory that you understand how they interact in the future. But wow, that's for a few seconds of screen time, like that's quite a bit of backstory.
Well, how do you feel about this character? Like, what do you think his vibe is? Would you hang out with him? Would you want to see him again in another installment of the Star Wars franchise? You were saying he should go the way of Jar Jar. I said, you mean become a homeless clown? Like,
yes, but then also you in his backstory, he worked for something called Freon, something or another. It sounds like an air conditioning.
Freon Dreven is like the mobster that he worked for. That's how he got into the business of selling counterfeit merchandise and smuggling it. And apparently they had a falling out because he's like, you know what, I don't like him. I'm going to snitch on him to the police, saying that he's like a tax cheat.
I like it. I like those morally gray characters. And it sounds like a pirate. He sounds like a pirate. Smuggling, counterfeit. I like that. He's giving me inspiration for some future side characters. I need to see a better visual though. He looks like, does he have really long spindly arms? Is that what those were?
I was going to say, I feel like this translates well to nerd media, because there's a lot of conversation of like, when can you pirate and when you can make, like fan art of certain things. Like there's a lot of conversation when it comes to like Star Wars, Marvel, different media. Like it's always been a contentious topic, I would say.
Right. And now as a guy who runs a con.
Yeah, exactly.
And, the reason I decided to lean into the circus theme is kind of the carnival and carny and charlatan and con artist side of conventions. There's a lot of counterfeit stuff. Oh, my God. Like,
oh, yeah.
There's no way. And what I love, too, is if you look at every show.
People counterfeit signatures on art and like, or they just reprint an art and it's not even original. They say it's signed. Like it gets real ugly.
It does, and that's a whole conversation in itself. Honestly, is authenticity. Also, because I've worked with some of the like grading companies, and as somebody who I've signed a lot of those Red Hulks #1s, and because that is such a collectible, even as the colorist, they will bring the CGC witness to authenticate, so that way when they have their collectible signed, it isn't just we can end on this funny story. But when I probably was like 10 years old, I think I signed a few fake Jim Lees on my X-Men just for fun, just to like, it was never to be like something I would sell. It was just maybe as an artist, like practicing signatures and like thinking to myself, like, how, but then you realize like, oh, wow, actually I have a
If
comic.
I were you, I would have practiced on some free comics.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, wow, so that's how people end up with, when they buy like collections and they find some random book in there and like, oh, looks like Jim Lee's autograph. And you're like, oh, well, it's not authenticated. Oh, little did you know it was like a 10-year-old who was just playing around. Not even with ill intentions.
I only have one comic that's like signed by the artist that worked on it. I have like one of the Crisis on Infinite Earth like single issues, and I got that signed by George Perez when I got to see him about a decade ago. And
Beautiful.
like super nice guy. Like I love just talking to him. Like he would talk to everyone that in his long ass line that was like overspilling. He would talk to everyone and just be like, "Hey, buddy, how's it going?" And like I was sad to learn his passing. Like obviously he has like so many accolades when it comes to the comic world. And I even like, here's an exclusive for you. I was able to ask his opinion about Teen Titans Go.
Did he have an opinion?
Yeah, he says, not really for me. It's for the kids. He says that, but I wish Cyborg was more human because now he's just like half of a head that's human. Everything else is a robot.
Right.
And he says, I wished they kept Starfire's afro because that's what caught fire in individual comics.
Wow, that's a great perspective. Yeah.
So yeah,
we could tie it all together because there's a Marvel Art of George Perez book, and it's Avengers, and I colored it.
Oh, cool!
And I actually colored George Perez on a few covers. One more obscure one because he wasn't known for this character was Conan. And there's a Conan cover that George drew that I colored, and I think it was towards the end of his career, and Marvel was being really generous to him as one of the legends where he would do convention sketch commissions. And some of the Marvel editors were huge fans. So they'd see like, oh, George drew this really awesome Conan sketch cover for somebody at a show. Let's offer to pay him again to reuse it as a variant cover. And then they bring me in to color it. So I had a few opportunities like that where they were essentially kind of giving him a royalty off of his art just to kind of keep him going.
I wouldn't really call Conan like really that obscure, mostly because like Arnold played him in a fairly big movie.
I meant not George Perez isn't really associated with Conan as much like Avengers. Yeah. No, Conan, no, far from obscure.
I'm like, you want to talk about obscure, talk about like character like the Human Fly.
Do you know who Belit is in the Conan world?
That doesn't sound familiar, no.
She's a queen of the Ivory Coast. She's very pale skinned. She's kind of one of the side characters when you see Conan and like the beautiful pirate lady next to him who's got really light. So that's Belit, Queen of the Ivory Coast. And when Marvel asked me, would you like to work on a Conan book? I was like, yeah, that's a dream. They're like, all right, what's this? It's this coming of age of Belit. And I was like, that's cool. So zero Conan, all young teenage version of Belit, written by Teenie Howard. And it turned out to be actually a really fun project and really cool art. And that is my actual main Conan credit. But I met my current lady because she tagged that cover art of that Belit book as a cosplay she wanted to do. And she tagged me as one of the creators. I saw that post and we connected up a little bit online just as like, I was like, oh, that's so awesome. You appreciated that more obscure character. And she's like, yeah, I love it. And I like tagging the artist. And I was like, awesome. And then she came out to Heroes Con and saw me as a guest and we hit it off. And it was that comic artist meets cosplayer connection that has inspired me to this day. And she continues to do character characters that I've worked on. She's going to do a Savage Red Sonja that Frank Cho drew that I colored as well. And again, that world of comics and cosplay coming together in my life, I can't get away from it now. But yeah, Belit, Conan, George Perez, we did it all.
So, getting back to the Glove Shadow, I do think it would be interesting if they did bring him back, but I think the best way to do it is like in a comic. Like I don't think they would put him in Mandalorian and Grogu. I feel like people are like, who's this?
Yeah. And in the comics, as somebody's worked there now, like at Marvel, they need to put out books every month. So that's how your obscure characters get like bigger, right? Like all of a sudden now they got a miniseries.
Yeah, like I remember when I had to Google who this Glub Shooter was in a comic, like who shows up in a movie. I'm like, who's this guy? So like the actor who originally played Boba Fett also played a character in Revenge of the Sith. He's like a pilot, and they brought him back into one of the comics, and like he has like an interaction with someone with like a mystical item, and I'm like, who's this dude? And I'm like, I had to Google. I'm like, oh, yeah, I better. He was in that movie. So even I get caught off guard. Me being this knee deep in the Star Wars universe.
All right. Well, when we wrap this up, you can send me a couple links to that character. I'm interested.
Before we part ways, do you have any questions or comments about me or my channel?
No, I'm going to go back in and watch the interview you did with Leighton so I could see some of your other content, but I appreciate him kind of linking this up.
Look into how odd I can get. Watch my, no, seriously. On my channel, my most watched video is me just talking about Star Wars conspiracies.
Okay.
It's not that long. I think it's like maybe 20 minutes. It's just like me rambling and like doing an iceberg. Like, I'm pretty sure you've seen it. Like, oh, this is what most people know. Some people know, like, almost nobody knows. That kind of setup. But so I want to thank you for appearing on my channel. You know, you've done a lot for the nerd sphere, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I consider myself a promote. Now that I run a Comic-Con, Comic-Con is like the ultimate safe space and meeting ground for the nerdiest of the nerdiest. And I love it because everybody is there because they love some part of some fandom so much that they want to celebrate it with other people. And especially with the art of cosplay, to become that character that you love so much is honestly one of the nerdier things you can do. And it's my everyday world now. But when I do occasionally cross paths with like real hardcore normies and I have to describe my world to them, that's when I'm kind of reminded, oh yeah, cosplay is still kind of weird for some people. Like the idea that 40-year-old adults will be going to some con every other weekend dressing up like their favorite characters is still considered pretty nerdy and weird, but
yeah,
you know, I love it, and I love promoting it. And you know, it's we didn't talk too much about my childhood, but I can assume just about anybody who goes down this road had time alone to kind of go down their imagination into the weird and strange. And you know, I can definitely tell you've done that with your conspiracy theory plots. Which, by the way, we should wrap this up. But you should be doing that as a panel at Comic-Cons. I feel like you'd have a good audience, especially the Star Wars conspiracy theories. I think you know you can submit that panel idea at Cosplay World. We might have to run that.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for being on my channel. I'm gonna let you go and stay honest to Klaud.
Ooh, yes, you as well.